Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Smart Indian Agriculture on the Federal.com. I am Vivian Fernandez. For the past 50 days, National Rural Employment Guarantee or NREGA workers have been protesting in relays at Delhi's Jantar Mantar. A batch from a state protests for 1 week and then another batch from another state takes over. So far, workers from Bihar, UP, Rajasthan, West Bengal, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, and Gujarat have taken part. They are going to be there for another 50 days, they insist. The workers are come by train, they travel in local buses, and they live in a rain basera or shelter for the homeless in East Delhi. When I visited the place, Jantar Mantar, a few days back, the lunch was contributed by a donor. If they are protesting in the April summer sun and suffering deprivation, the issues must be quite pressing indeed. The workers are protesting the marking of attendance through an app called the National Mobile Monitoring System or NMMS. They say the budget for the program is less than what is required. Another grouse is that they do not get work on demand and that the number of days for which work is available is less than the entitlement under the law, which is 100 days. They're also aggrieved about delayed payments. Though this is not strictly an agricultural issue, we are discussing it under farm matters because it pertains to the rural economy and affects agricultural wages. Our guest is Dr. Sudha Narayanan, a researcher at the International Food Policy Research Institute. She has written extensively on NREGA based on field visits and surveys and has tracked the evolution of the scheme since it was rolled out nationally in April 2008. In fact, she had also assisted the bill drafting team initially in 2004. Dr. Narayanan, welcome. Thanks for making the time.
Thank you so much for having me here, Vivian.
Dr. Narayanan, the workers do not want attendance to be marked via the National Mobile Monitoring System. Now, isn't there merit? Is there merit in their objections? Because there are about 2.6 million works across the country. So isn't it good to have an eye in the sky to monitor works that are happening across the country on such a vast scale?
I think the pertinent question to ask is who needed this at this stage, and was there no better option? So if you look back at these work sites, there was a way in which people were marking attendance in a muster roll. And in any case, I think the NREGA, actually, you get wages are paid based on the work that you do. So even if you show up, that's not by itself going to get you wages. You need to have put in work. That work is measured by mates and you're paid piece rate. So it's kind of unusual that when you're paid for the work in piece rate, that you should also then enforce something that just shows that they are physically present. So that is a fundamental issue. The second issue is this whole idea that it's interesting you use eye in the sky, because it's a little bit of a surveillance mechanism which is convenient to the people who are at the other end monitoring these things. But let's see how the workers actually, how it's implemented and the issues they face. And this is clearly articulated by those who are protesting. So one of the things is you need a smartphone, you need connectivity, and many of us in cities take it for granted. But the problem is quite genuine. Even in some of the institutions we research in, we don't get connectivity, and we have to come out to find a spot to take a call. So that's one thing. The infrastructure does not really allow easy uploading of these attendance, and you have to upload pictures. It's just not an SMS text message. The other thing is the mates are expected to own smartphones and pay for the data themselves. And this again can marginalize women who don't have access to these and those who are relatively poorer. And then the other issue is actually that's probably more what the concern that people have is that, oh, the workers come and then they disappear and they get marked attendance and they get paid wages. On the one hand, we had the piece rate, but the other thing, the beauty of NREGA is also that because you could work and you got paid only for the work that you did, in some sense, women had the flexibility, especially women, because they have household chores, caregiving responsibilities. They may have their own very small plots they need to work. And of course, spending 8 hours in the hot sun is not the best thing to do. So they often work very early in the morning, put in 4 or 5 hours in the NREGA, come back and take care of their other responsibilities. So the NMMS in particular asks for 2 photographs to be uploaded, one in the morning and the afternoon. That seems counterintuitive and inimical to the way women have used it. And in fact, NREGA is lauded world over as being a women's program. I want to say
Now,
just one.
let me interrupt you because you have raised a number of issues. So you are saying that um, that this monitoring does not serve a purpose because, after all, there are so many work sites, 2.6 billion work sites, and so many million more workers, and it's impossible for any group of people to monitor it centrally. Is that what you are saying?
Absolutely. And in fact, there is very strong evidence that has emerged recently that people upload any photograph they find. So people have found photos of marketplaces, of just random people standing around. And in fact, several of the work sites have the same picture for multiple work sites at multiple points of time. This goes to show that those who know how to game the system and have access to these technologies are taking advantage. And so if the
So the
idea
other
was
point
to
you
reduce...
yeah. So the other point you're making is that despite all this, corruption does happen, and the person who works and the person who gets the wages can be two different people.
Absolutely. I think the corruption in NREGA, I think even the most, the greatest fans of NREGA will admit that there is a lot of scope of corruption. And one of the issues that is also that the increasing centralization and introducing technologies have in fact benefited those who are corrupt and who have known how to work around these at the expense of those who actually need it and who were doing an honest day's work and expecting to be paid. This is a larger topic that we may not have time to go into, but
Yes.
repeatedly we see that the introduction of technology means the contractors who may be illegally employed find a way to around it and collude with the powers that be, but often leaving the real worker to their own devices.
Yeah. So before NMMS was introduced in May 2022, in work sites with more than 20 persons, and at all work sites since January this year, how was work monitored?
So one of the things that the government mandated was that there has to be a geotagging of work sites. So basically, you again measure the work by whether the work was actually constructed. So they uploaded before and after pictures. There's also a social audit mechanism where people can actually figure out whether their names have been used as fake workers. And so there have been checks and balances both within the act as well as some policy interventions that can actually be leveraged to do this monitoring. I mean, you may be interested to know that when we did a survey of assets in Maharashtra, we found 80% of the assets and in fact, a larger number of 12% more of the assets were not meant to be permanent. They were supposed to be flood control sandbags that anyway get washed away. So it's not as if in the absence of this NMMS, work was not happening or workers were not coming. And in fact, in some states, they also have this call for attendance. So in a work site, for example, in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, they used to have a phone-based system where they mark the attendance, but they call it out loud so that everyone in the work site knows who is being marked present or absent. So there is a local mutual monitoring, community-based monitoring that was in place. And I think we haven't appreciated these little things enough so far.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned about social audits, and when I had gone to Rajasthan many years back to do a TV program on NREGA for a television channel I was then employed with, I found that on the panchayat office walls as well as elsewhere, details of the various works that were undertaken were written so that people could see whether the work was actually done or not, and they could exert community pressure. Now, is this form of social audit actually working or no? Because see, in many places you have local hierarchies. Not everyone can open their mouths or voice their concerns, because there could be a backlash from the powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the social audit mechanism offers a way or a device that can potentially empower people. But at the end of the day, local politics sometimes overrides all of these. But in many states, having this mechanism is important, because at least you've moved one step, that the law or the institutional rules of the game are on your side. Now, what has happened is, I think many scholars have written about the very varying experience of social audits across different states. And in fact, many social audit institutions are themselves operate a bit top down. But it was felt that without the government actually enabling that from above, these things will not be generated at the community level automatically. So the social audit continues to be a weak link, but you rightly pointed out that transparency and accountability need not come from a formal social audit process. Just information boards is a very simple example of how that transparency and accountability at the local level can be ensured. And we have examples of that from several states, including union territories like Andaman and Nicobar, in Meghalaya. It's not uncommon to see these NREGA boards that actually tell you what is the work number, that you can go and cross-check an MIS, the information system, the administrative information system, as well as how many person days actually did that work.
Hmm. Now, you mentioned about corruption, and you said in Maharashtra, when you had done a survey or a study, you found that many of the works were actually of a non-permanent nature, and they could be washed away in the rain so that no trace would remain. Is the corruption of such a magnitude as to mar the entire program?
I would want to just correct that I'm sorry if I did not communicate clearly. So 80% of the works existed. We saw them and they were of good quality. We may now ask what happened to that 20%. Out of that, only 8% of the works we could not locate at all. This is out of a list of 4,600 assets. Now, what happens to the remaining 12%? So 8% were the ghost works, 80% who existed and were in decent condition. Now that remaining 12% was actually works that are protect communities against natural disasters. So if you have sandbags that prevent a river overflowing and destroying homes, you would expect it not to remain, but you do see traces of it. So it's not as if it is a fake work, but it was a work that served its purpose and has fulfilled its purpose. But you don't see any, you don't see it being durable in the way we understand it.
Mhm. So, given the fact that about 80% of the projects were durable structures, I would imagine these were, let's say, village ponds or water recharge structures that made agriculture resilient amid community projects. So, given the high number of durable assets, you would think that we can live with a little bit of corruption, because this program has other objectives. For example, it provides a safety net in terms of distress. So maybe we can live with it, with this small amount of corruption, and tighten as we go ahead.
Yeah, I think we should not be accepting any corruption at all. But I think what we need to focus on is the good examples of what the NREGA can achieve. And there we see some spectacular examples. And no doubt there are also bad examples, like where some of the designs of these works were wrong, so the well is not where it should be, and so on. But by and large, with enough technical inputs and community participation in the decision, we see some really excellent examples. For example, curbing salt infiltration into soil salinity because of coastal water incursion. You see barriers there. You see mangrove restoration. You see barriers to prevent soil erosion on the river banks. You see farm ponds, which are quite common, which actually enable protective irrigation. So it directly helps agriculture. Lots of land leveling works. Now, many poor people are poor partly also because their land is not of high quality. So the NREGA actually enables them to level the land so that they are able to grow high value crops. We see low cost bamboo greenhouses, which can grow. I've seen examples of floriculture and trenches, small reservoirs, not to mention the ridge to valley watershed and water conservation works. So certainly, I mean, even before the government called for a majority of the works to support agriculture, I think they mandated 60% in 2014-15. Long before that, it had already outstripped that number, the numbers that were supporting agriculture. And one example is even rural connectivity. We found that many of these farms are not reachable by tractors. So getting the harvest to the main road itself was such a logistical nightmare. And these little kacha roads built under the NREGA connects fields to the main road itself is transformative. So you have these large diversity of works that have really supported agriculture.
So NREGA is not just a make work program. It is not about just digging holes and filling them up.
Far from it, right? So I think this it's a catchy thing, digging holes and and the fact that NREG is a dole. But I think there's a lot of now there needs to be more evidence. But we find a lot of evidence that the returns to NREG assets is actually multiple times, and even comparing other project investments that we would think of, and these are all accruing to small and marginal communities. I also want to mention that there isn't any other program like the NREGA in all of them, so hundreds of programs that the government has, because here is a program that directly addresses and the problems and challenges faced by small and marginal farmers in remote locations to tackle climate change crises in their own local way. And I think if you look at the roster of programs that the government is implementing, there isn't money going down to the level of the village that can actually service the larger challenges of facing small farmers today.
Now, one more question regarding corruption. Since December 2021, no wages have been paid in West Bengal. And the central government says that there is massive corruption in NREGA in West Bengal. What do you think? I mean, corruption at that level?
I don't know enough about
not at that level, at that scale, I mean.
Yeah, I don't know about the specific issue because I track more of the assets and their impacts than the funds flow issue. But I think there is also a larger political economy at play here. And that was one of the objections that many states had early on. Now, early on, what used to happen was the funds came to the state and the state had some control over distributing these funds. But ever since the wages went directly from the central government into the wage workers' accounts, the state became incapacitated in some sense to actually ensure wages were paid in time. So, for example, if funds were delayed from the central government, the state government would use other funds to pay the NREGA workers and replace it. So, since money was fungible, they found a way to ensure that the wages were not held up. Now it seems like the entire control over everything that has to do with funds, but also the nature of works has shifted one level up to the federal level. And there it's very hard to figure out, it becomes a blame game and it's very hard to figure out what is going on. And I think the centralization is part of the problem, that then you can actually you can make this claim and then not transfer money to the states. but the ones who are suffering are actually the workers. So I
So
think
this is a program that's entirely funded by the center.
that's correct. Yeah.
Mhm. Now, you are saying that the national mobile monitoring system does not, I mean, from what you said, doesn't seem to serve a purpose. Then why insist on it? Why has it been made mandatory?
I believe that's the question the protesting workers are asking the government. Uh, yeah, and we are waiting for answers. Yeah.
So just let me hazard a guess, because this year the budget has made an allocation of 60,000 crores for NREGA, and the outlay is 61% of the amount spent last year. Of course, the finance minister says that this is a demand-driven scheme, and as and when demand materializes, the money will be given, and there can be supplementary demands also later on. Now, do you think that given the fact that the Prime Minister himself has not taken much of a shine to this program, he in fact called it a monumental failure to the government's inability to create productive jobs? So, do you think that there is some kind of this is a ploy to reduce demand and discourage workers from seeking work?
I won't hazard a guess as to the motives of the policymakers, but the ground truth is that given the delays in wages and given what we call administrative rationing, which is essentially I want work, but I'm not given work. And we have found evidence that eventually workers lose interest in the program, because who wants to work on a program without the guarantee of being paid? So I think that is a very real problem. Whether or not that has actually now become a policy goal is not something for me to answer. The other issue that's also been interesting and disturbing is the fact that job cards get cancelled. So if a worker has not used the NREGA for 3 years or something, occasionally they just cancel these job cards saying there's a potential for misuse. And this is not the way the program was envisaged. It was, and for example, COVID offers a really good example. So yes, I'm a migrant, I've gone out, but there is a disaster. I come back to my village and I want to work, but my card has been cancelled. So a lot of people during COVID not only depended on the NREGA, but are also denied the NREGA because they had to then apply for a card and so on. So this idea that it's a demand-driven program is acknowledged in word, but not in spirit. And I think that's the big problem.
Mhm. No, you have written about the discouraged worker effect. Can we say that NMMS can produce that effect?
Yeah, I think it's worse than discouragement, right? It's almost from the accounts we hear from the workers and the mates themselves, it seems worse than discouragement. It seems more like a disaster where your people are working and are not getting paid at all, with no prospects of getting that money at any time in the future, which is one step worse than getting paid with a long delay. So I think it's really pushing it to the extreme.
But how does that happen? Because can you work without marking attendance first? And you can't mark attendance. Your attendance is not marked unless your photograph is uploaded, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
not as
and
if you work and then mark attendance.
that's right. So what happens is if the photograph is not there, my understanding of the process is that if your photo is not uploaded, everyone in that muster roll doesn't get paid, because the work that you have done is treated as zero attendance, no work done. And suddenly, even though an honest worker or a worker group may have worked, and the piece rate of paying wages, the mate can measure that work and say they have worked, the photo becomes the truth. And that's the problem.
Yeah, I've heard about this thing, because one of the guys was saying from Sarguja, Chhattisgarh, he was saying that his KYC was done and his photo was uploaded, but his wife's KYC was not done. And that is why both of them did not get the wages for the work they had done.
Yeah, I think this also speaks to this other problem of bank linkages, Aadhaar seeding, and that's a whole bunch of other challenges that others like Professor Jean Reyes has written about this Aadhaar bridge payment system, which is
Mhm.
also an attack from another side.
Mhm. But that was made compulsory. I mean, Aadhaar linkages of bank accounts was made compulsory because they wanted to make sure that the money went into the workers of the accounts of the workers. Now, here is the intentions seem to be good, though the fallout may not have been as intended.
Uh, I think the point is this program is for the workers, and the money as it is was going directly into their bank accounts. So it's not very clear what was the problem. So
Mhm.
when you said wages will be paid into their bank accounts, what could have been the problem? How does Aadhaar linking actually improve it? Or this
Mhm.
Aadhaar bridge payments? And again, I think a lot has been written about the problems with this payment system, and how this Aadhaar bridge payments actually could deflect the payments into the most recent account, which could be an Airtel wallet.
Mhm.
And so it doesn't, it's trying to solve a problem that did not exist in the first place. If you ask the
Mhm.
workers what the problem was that this Aadhaar bridge is solving, they will say that we don't know. It's a
Mhm.
problem that is in the minds of the policymakers to be able to track payments and use Aadhaar as a way to, as you said, look at everything from 1,000 feet. You get this. You get a complete sense of what's going on. But
Mhm.
it is a solution that was looking for a problem to solve and was just executed and created problems in turn.
Mhm. From what I understand is that when you insist on biometric identification of manual workers, often what happens is that because of physical wear and tear, their biometrics may not what you call match those that are in the repository or in the database. Is that the problem?
No, I think the other payments is slightly different. I don't think it calls for a verification based on Aadhaar, on fingerprinting or biometrics. It's just about linking. Aadhaar becomes your financial address. So your
Mhm.
Aadhaar number will automatically routes it to an account that you can access, except that there may be a problem with it as representing a financial address. So if
Mhm.
my bank account is linked to an Aadhaar, I no longer need my bank account number. I only need my Aadhaar number. But that
Mhm.
connection is often fraught with problems because that connection is not made perfectly and there are huge errors. Uh,
Okay.
I think with the Aadhaar bridge and payments that have been mandated, I think the estimate is that 46% of the NREJ workers today will not be able to get paid, and
Mhm.
that's the number. So it's not so much about biometric authentication, which is a different issue, but it's this idea that you're using Aadhaar as a financial address.
Okay. Now, you also mentioned about administrative rationing of work. Now, NREGA is supposed to be demand driven. When you ask for work, you should be given. And now you are talking about rationing, which means that it is supply driven.
That's right. And that's always been a concern that many have pointed out, that it's not always the case that work is demanded and given. Of course, we are talking about India, which is highly heterogeneous. There are states where the rationing rates are minuscule, where if you want work, there's a proper process, everyone knows it, you apply and you get work. But there are several other places where workers still report in surveys that they can demand, but they're only called to work when the jobs open up, which is to
Mhm.
say that the Gram Rozgar Sevak actually says work is available, come. So it becomes supply driven. Now, one
Yes.
additional issue that we are recently seeing, and we have just come back from fieldwork in Orissa, where they were saying the Gram Rozgar Sevak, who's diligent and wants to provide work, says that it's very difficult for us because if we don't have the funds coming in, then what work can we open and what guarantee can we give the workers that they'll get paid? And because of that, they say we don't open works at all. So they say that we become the target and the face that's exploiting them. And so it becomes very hard for us to offer work.
We have time for 2 or 3 very quick questions. Now, this was supposed to be a safety net. Has it performed that function?
Yes, I think all the evidence we have today suggests that it's a very reliable safety net, especially pro-women. And I think COVID, despite all of the flaws in expanding adequately, we find that the NREGA actually served as a safety net. So the answer is a resounding yes.
Yeah, when the scheme was formulated, about a third of the workers were supposed to be women. Have a third of the workers been of women been employed?
Yeah, in fact, that's one area where we've consistently outperformed the targets. I think the recent figures actually, it hovers between 46 and 52. In some states, it's as high as 80%. So it's definitely the employment guarantee scheme in Maharashtra in the 70s used to be called a women's program. That's probably true of the national scheme as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, this scheme is supposed to create durable assets. It is supposed to make agriculture resilient. Has it done that work, or has there been a change in the asset profile, in the kind of works that can be executed? And is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think there have been there are 2 points in the history of the NREGA that are significant. One was what they called NREGA 2, which allowed convergence of different line departments, where the idea was that the NREGA puts in money, but money for the materials and other things is supplied by the line departments. Now, that both offered opportunities, but also diluted the NREGA a little bit away from the works that could have truly been earthworks for water conservation and so on. But that was the lesser issue. Now, more recently, in the last 5 years, if you read the asset list, it's about building toilets and houses. And even the norms for farm ponds, for example, has become so large in scale that actually no farmer wants to give up that size of land for a pond, because the pond is all they'll be left with, not land. So there are these, one problem is the toilets and houses. I don't think anyone disagrees that everyone should have a toilet or a house. The question is whether the NREGA was the right program to do it. My view is that no, because as I said, the NREGA is very uniquely positioned to tackle challenges around agriculture. So this trend is disturbing.
And one last question. NREGA has been there for 15 years. Should there be an expiry date? Can it continue for perpetuity? Do you think that it is still relevant? Is it relevant in this year?
I think the question of relevance remains, because I think COVID was a very good example. After 20 years of vibrant growth, the COVID hit, and suddenly NREGA became the safety net that was needed. I just want to conclude by quoting a bureaucrat from Maharashtra who actually drew the analogy of the army. He said, we have an army that marches every day, trains every day. It's not because we expect a war every day, but should that war come, we have the mechanism to cope with it. And the NREGA, his analogy was the NREGA, we should view it exactly like that. The institution and architecture should be there, because should the need arise, we just activate it.
Yeah, just as we had buffer stocks of grain, which helped us during COVID. On that note, Sudha Narayanan, thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insights.